Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila with this week's story. Now, our story has a strange name. It's called Vicarious Punishment. I wonder if any of you know what that long word means. Vicarious. Well, vicarious means when someone takes punishment for someone who's guilty, but they take that person that's guilty's place and they are punished instead. That's what vicarious means. Well, our story comes from a one-room schoolhouse. We've had a lot of stories about one-room schoolhouses lately, but this one was especially touching. The students were in a very hot schoolroom. The windows had been opened just a little bit, and the breeze was playing through the windows, making the curtains fly back and forth, turning the pages on the books that sat open on top of the desks. While the kids were, in spite of the heat, they were studying hard. Well, finally, everything in the classroom had been completed, with the exception of the last class of the day, and that was the spelling class. Well, I'm sure that all of you must have participated sometime in a spelling bee. A spelling bee is when the students all stand up in a row in front of the teacher, and the teacher gives the first one in line a word to spell, and they spell it. And if they get it right, they go to the end of the line so they can keep standing. Well, if you don't spell it right, the teacher will tell you that you've made a mistake, and you'll have to go and sit down, and you're not able to participate anymore in the spelling bee. Well, you know, most teachers have trouble with one thing in their classroom. And a lot of you go, yeah, I'm guilty of that. Well, what it was whispering. Have you ever whispered when the teacher's up front trying to teach you and you're whispering to somebody sitting beside you and distracting them? Well, this teacher, he had tried to figure out ways of stopping the students from whispering. So finally, he came up with a plan. And this is what it was. He made a rule that if someone was caught whispering by the teacher would have them walk up front and stand in front of the teacher's desk. Well, they would stand there until the class was completed, and then the teacher would punish that person. Well, punishment was different in those days. It might be taking a ruler and hitting somebody's hand. It might be spanking them. It could be any punishment that the teacher came up with in those days. But there was a way to get out of your punishment. And that was if, while you were standing up front, the teacher called that person that was standing there a monitor, which meant that they were watching for something. Well, the person that had whispered was monitoring during the rest of the classes to see if they caught anybody else whispering. Well, it was basically kind of like tattling on someone to the teacher for something they'd done. But that was the way it went. So the spelling bee started, and there was a young guy standing in front of the desk who the teacher had caught whispering in another class. And of course, he didn't want to be punished. And he was generally very kind of unruly in class, and he didn't do what he was told, and he was just ornery. Well, he determined that he was not going to be punished, so he was really alert, watching for another whisperer. Well, the spelling bee started, and the whole class knew that Eunice was the best speller in the class. She was always the best speller. Well, when it came time for her to spell, the teacher gave her the word privilege, and she started spelling P-R-I. Then she was sounding it out. B-I-L. And then she stopped, and she continued, Ledge, L-E-G-E, P-R-I-V-I-L-E-G-E. And she said privilege. Well, the teacher had been busy watching some of the other students that weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And so she didn't hear Eunice spell that word correctly. She told Eunice that she'd made a mistake and she needed to go to her seat. Eunice couldn't believe it. She knew she'd spelled that word right. And so, under her breath, she was going to tell the teacher that the teacher had made a mistake. But she whispered it out, and the teacher didn't seem to think that the fact that she was questioning whether she got the word right or not, the teacher didn't like that and didn't want to be questioned, and said, Eunice, you whispered. You come take this boy's place. Well, Eunice was a little girl. She was littler than the boy that had been standing up there. And she never got into trouble and she never whispered. But of course she had. So what could she do? She went and she stood in front of the teacher's desk. But she didn't look for other people that might be whispering. She stood there, and the tears ran down her face while she waited for the teacher to get ready to punish her. All she could do was cry. Now, the rest of the class, they knew that Eunice was the best speller. They knew that she was the best student in the class. They knew that she was kind-hearted and faithful. And because of all those things, all the other students in the class loved her. Now, part of the kids started crying. They knew that this was unjust. And they stared at the big boy that was always getting in trouble, that had told on Eunice. Well, the teacher was all ready and was going to punish Eunice when from the back of the classroom, one of the big boys came forward and he said, "Sir, are you going to punish Eunice?" And the teacher said, "That's my rule. She disobeyed." And the boy looked at the teacher very bravely and said, "Well then, I will take her punishment." Some of the kids went, "Oh, would they be willing to do that?" But they were glad somebody had. And the teacher said, "Now, let me understand this right. You are willing to take Eunice's punishment?" And the boy stood up straight and said, "Yes, sir." So the teacher said, "All right then." And he gave that severe punishment to the boy while all the other students looked on in horror. Well, you know, that day the students realized there was a hero in their classroom. And little Eunice had gone and sat down. Boys and girls, when class got out and everyone left the school for the day, all the boys circled around that tall young boy that had been willing to take Eunice's punishment. And this is what they did. They praised him for what he had done. Boys and girls, remember that word at the first of our story. Vicarious. Vicarious punishment. I'm going to read you what the definition of that means. One suffering from his own free will, by his own free will, taking the punishment that was to have been given to another. That's what that young boy did. He freely took Eunice's punishment. And you know, there's somebody who did that for all of us. Jesus did that when our world started to sin. And you know, sin, the punishment for sin is death. And Jesus didn't want us to have to die. So Jesus told his Father, the Father God, that he would come down here and die for us. That is vicarious punishment. Thank you, boys and girls. And I want you today to thank Jesus for taking yours and my punishment so we could be saved. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.